All right, it's time now to move on with a look through today's French newspapers. Diptyque Laurent has been thumbing through them eagerly for us. Hello there.
Hi, Kat.
We're going to start us off with almost unbelievable now, ninth of protests against French labour law reforms. It's really been going on for such a long time, hasn't it?
It feels a lot longer than 9 days, to be honest. We've been hearing about it a lot. Le Figaro says Hollande is under pressure. Hollande sous pression, a three-word headline from the right-leaning paper. He's under pressure, really, to outlaw future protests. And this is particularly after the violence we saw outside a children's hospital on Tuesday. Now, the newspaper really attacks the French president in its editorial. The editorial is called Exhaustion or L'épuisement, denouncing in particular the government's seemingly unstoppable loss of authority in France right now. They also criticize what they call Hollande's lack of courage. They say he's weak, rather than ordering firmly that there will be no future protests under France's state of emergency laws. He's sort of dilly-dallying on the issue, and they really take him to task this morning.
All right, and of course, they've got the government on one side, the trade unions on the other. One of them, the CGT, I'm sure you probably know that name by now. They are really pushing on with these protests, aren't they? And we've got some very different opinions about the CGT in the newspapers.
Let's start with L'Opinion. L'Opinion is a right-wing daily newspaper. They say on their headline, Le jeu dangereux de Martinez, the dangerous game of Martinez. Now, Martinez, of course, is the CGT union leader, Philippe Martinez. He's a rather hard-headed, thick-mustached president, and you see him in this cartoon this morning on the front page as a lion tamer who's not really doing much to tame his lions. Instead, he's setting them loose on the crowd. And I think it really reflects what the newspaper thinks of the protests, that he's in a position to quell the unrest, but he's choosing not to do so. Now, on the flip side, the communist newspaper, L'Humanité, really critiques the critique, and they accuse the powers of be in France of stooping to, quote, anti-union hate. So very strong words there. Now, the newspaper is, of course, against forbidding protests. They say that it's a fundamental right of French people. And this is also the opinion shared by the left-leaning paper Le Figaro. They have a rather explosive front page this morning, La bataille de l'opinion, the battle of the opinions, which really pits, as you mentioned, the government at loggerheads with the unions. And they really accuse the government of dramatizing the violence and trying to discredit the CGT union, which, of course, we know that the French people have been supporting somewhat for the last couple of months.
Well, the right to protest is so sort of fiercely guarded here in France, isn't it? France is known around the world for its strikes and protests. Other newspapers commenting on that as well?
Indeed, they are. Le Parisien says, they say, they have this rather existential headline this morning. What world are we living in? And a very sad title with pictures of protests, the police couple that were murdered, football hooligans, and that's just in France. La Croix has also followed a similar headline, wondering why is there so much violence? And another existential sort of melancholic headline. And I really like this article from La Croix because I think it's the most balanced that we've seen. The newspaper, of course, denounces the violence that we saw outside the hospital, but they say that the unions are not really responsible. This is the actions of a small group of troublemakers on the margins or the fringes of the protests. It really defends the right to protest, saying that it's a constitutional right, not just an important fundamental one, a constitutional one. But it does warn people to sort of disassociate their opinions of the protests when we see images like this from the core of the protests.
It really is polluting the message, isn't it? I think a lot of people who aren't taking part in the protests might have been sympathetic before, but yeah, the violence is turning a lot of people against that message. We can move on to the other major news story here in France this week. The investigation is that brutal double murder of a police commander and his partner. More details coming out, of course.
Details coming out of Libération this morning. According to Libération, Larossi Abala, who is the perpetrator of those brutal attacks, allegedly knew his victims. At least he knew the police commander. That's what he told L'Ored, which of course is the French SWAT team or the elite police who were there on Monday evening. He had told them that Jean-Baptiste Salvin, the police commander, had been to his house before. And this really lends support to the theory that he actually targeted his victims, that it was a premeditated attack, which is also a hypothesis that the Paris prosecutor has also evoked. And given that Abala was in and out of prison, it certainly seems credible that the two men did cross paths.
All right, very sad story, complicated investigation. Waiting, of course, for more details from that. Thanks so much for now. Diptyque Laurent going through some of the top headlines in the French papers today.